I sell hot dogs in a horror game. After their shifts, the monsters all come to me for a sizzling, Chicago-style hot dog. But one day, my ex-husband Vincent Shaw, the same man who had once been addicted to violence, entered the game as a player. He knocked me out with a baseball bat, trying to drag me back into the real world. When the monsters finished work and found my hot dog stand empty, they went wild, scouring the entire game world for me. During that time, players were hunted down by dungeon bosses demanding answers to a single deadly question: did you kidnap a hot dog lady? The player forums even posted an SSS-level bounty mission: find the hot dog lady. On my very first day in the horror game, a man in a sharp suit asked me what skills I had. I thought long and hard before answering: I can make hot dogs. He face-bombed, utterly exasperated, but still handed me the keys to a stall. After that, he vanished. I spent half a day cleaning the stall, then slipped back into the real world to buy supplies. When everything was ready, I opened for business beneath the rising blood-red moon. At first, no one came. Hours passed. Maybe the spot was too far out of the way. Still, I told myself, the aroma will bring them in. Just be patient. Hungry, I grilled myself a bun, dropped sausages into the warmer, tossed onions on the grill, and built a proper Chicago dog: bacon, lettuce, jalapenos, and finally a pile of steaming chili mac on top. The first bite nearly brought tears to my eyes. Same flavor as always. Perfect. I didn't notice the smell drifting outside until a pair of worn ballet slippers appeared at the stall. The air grew icy cold. A chilling voice whispered, "What are you eating? Smells so good." Instinct took over. I greeted the unseen customer: "Welcome. Our specialty is the super-duper deluxe Chicago dog. Would you like one?" A tiny hand lifted a pouch of coins onto the counter. "One, please." Leaning over, I saw her, a little girl in a tattered antique wedding dress, eyes wide with hope. The pouch was heavy, at least 20 gold coins. I picked out a single copper coin and handed the rest back. "This is enough." Feeling pity for how thin she looked, I made her the biggest hot dog I'd ever crafted: 5 sausages, bacon, crispy chicken strips, fried onions, cheese, chili mac. It was so overloaded the bun split apart. She didn't hesitate. Her mouth split open unnaturally wide, and she shoved the entire hot dog inside in one bite. "Umph. What is this heavenly food? So good." I raised my thumb in awe. First time anyone had ever finished my super-duper deluxe in one bite. The next day, she returned with friends, each one in old, torn wedding dresses, their bodies bearing the marks of drowning, hanging, and other fates. They told me villagers had once sacrificed them to spirits. Heartbroken, I fed them until they were stuffed, promising them free hot dogs anytime. By afternoon, word had spread. My stall was packed with monsters. Every one of them left satisfied, praising the toasted buns, juicy sausages, bacon, and melted cheese. "Only with a taste like this," sighed a monster covered in eyeballs, "is life worth living." Business exploded. Supplies ran out constantly. I kept slipping back to the real world to restock. Players started noticing. They tried to recruit me into dungeon raids, but I always refused. I wasn't a fighter, I was just the hot dog lady. Then one day, a squad of a dozen players stumbled into my stall. At first, they were tense, weapons drawn. But when nothing attacked, they relaxed, removed their masks, and collapsed into chairs. That's when I saw him. The leader. Vincent Shaw. Fear surged through me. Bruises from years ago seemed to throb all over again. Before I could run, he spotted me. His eyes lit up, and in a flash, his baseball bat struck. I collapsed, paralyzed but conscious, unable to move or speak. The other players laughed. "Hey boss, found a pretty one. When you're done, share with us." Vincent sneered. "That's my wife." Ran off with another man. "Never thought I'd catch her here." He smashed my counter, stumped my freshly made hot dog into the dirt. "You belong to the Shaw family, alive or dead?" The ruined hot dog had been ordered by a customer. I pleaded silently for him to stop, but he only grew angrier. Then he grabbed another hot dog and took a huge bite. Moments later, he spat it out in horror, choking on a severed finger. "What the hell did you put in there?" he screamed, striking me again. It wasn't meant for him. That order belonged to the Stitcher from Haunted Manor. He, and a dozen other bosses, were due to arrive soon. A knock rattled the stall. Then another. And another. The players froze. No monsters should have been here. From the shadows, a disembodied hand crawled inside. Lefty, the Stitcher's right hand. He paused when he saw the destroyed hot dog on the floor. His fingers curled into a fist. He was furious. Detection gear blared, multiple S-class bosses incoming. Another scanner shrieked, SSS class. 2 targets. Moving fast. The players panicked. One bolted for the exit, only to freeze as the Stitcher himself appeared in the doorway, Lefty crawling back onto his wrist. Adjusting his tie, the Stitcher stepped inside, knocking politely. Madam, I'm here for my hot dogs. Then his eyes landed on the wreckage, the missing stallkeeper, the stomped food. His stitches trembled with rage. Who, his voice rumbled, touched my hot dog? The Stitcher stood in the ruined doorway with Lefty flexing on his wrist, stitches quivering across his jawline as if each thread held back a storm. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Who touched my hot dog? He asked, and the stale air of the stall seemed to shrink until even the broken warmer and the splintered chairs held their breath. The players froze like mannequins left too long in a cold storefront. I lay behind the half-toppled counter, vision clear but limbs numb, the paralysis from the blow still pinning me to the floor. I could taste grit and chili on my tongue and I could hear my own blood rushing in my ears. I could not speak. I could only watch. Vincent recovered first. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand as if the taste of fear were something he had learned to swallow, then squared his shoulders and put himself in front of his squad with that familiar performance he used to wear in courtrooms and family dinners and every place he needed to convince the world he was the reasonable one. He said the stall was abandoned. He said the food was cold. He said the mess he had made was evidence of a safety hazard. The words came easy because lying had always been his first language. He lifted the bat like a prop and tapped the floor in a lazy rhythm that made the weaker players edge closer to him as if his cadence could keep them alive. Lefty slipped off the Stitcher's wrist, a pale thing in the dark, and scuttled across the floorboards without sound. He stopped beside the stomped hot dog, pressed his fingers to the ruined bun as gently as a physician checking a pulse, and then raised his thumb like a signal to a jury. He reached into the mess and pinched out a thread of denim with a smear of chili. Lefty held it up. The Stitcher turned his face slightly, and the neat cross stitches near his cheekbone tightened. That thread was blue. The denim it came from was the exact wash of the jeans Vincent wore. The players shifted. One of them began to lift a detector again, as if the glare of an instrument could dispel the weight of a moment. The Stitcher did not look at the device. He looked at me. His eyes did not glow or blaze or do any of the things stories say monsters' eyes do. He only glanced once and that was enough. The look was a question. Could I stand? Could I testify? Could I claim what was mine? I tried to move my fingers. They were heavy as metal. I willed my thumb to twitch. It did not. Another presence slid in behind the Stitcher, and then another, and then the hallway beyond the stall filled with quiet silhouettes that smelled like river water and damp stone and iron. The little girl in the antique wedding dress stood at the Stitcher's left, her hands clasped, her eyes bright and unblinking. The rope-marked man came to the right, taller than the doorway, his head angled as if listening to a faraway bell. The waterlogged woman left a thin line of droplets with each step she took, and 12 more girls in torn lace clustered together by the broken condiment shelf, whispering to one another and then falling silent when they saw me on the floor, their faces sharpened by a single protective hunger. It was not the hunger I fed with food. It was the hunger to keep safe what had fed them. The man in the sharp suit appeared last, as if he were a fold in the air that needed to be smoothed flat before he could exist. He adjusted his cuffs as if he were arriving at a board meeting, not at a siege. He did not smell of damp or iron. He smelled like paper and static, like pages turning and systems booting. He looked at the broken stall and then at my still body and then at the bat. He sighed through his nose as if the mess were inconvenient only in the way spilled coffee is inconvenient to someone who will never have to clean it. He said, in a voice that belonged to briefings and contracts, that the covenant of hospitality was in effect. Vincent laughed. He laughed the way he always did when he believed words were tools he could pick up and turn against the person who had spoken them. He asked what covenant? He asked what hospitality? He jerked his chin at the horror around him and asked if anyone in this place looked like a guest. The man in the suit did not look at him. He addressed the room the way an announcement addresses a station. He said that any site designated for trade and sustenance under Game License 46/9 was protected. He said that harm against the proprietor inside the bounds of that designation was a violation. He said that destruction of paid goods was a violation. He said that stomping a customer's order would be counted as a direct injury to the guest and to the house. He said that such violations triggered a window in which normal restrictions on interclass conflict were lifted and enforcement could be carried out by interested parties on behalf of the house. He said that this was not a dungeon and therefore penalties would be assessed differently. He said that this was worse. Vincent stopped tapping the bat. He glanced at his wrist. Penalty markers flared in a thin bracelet of light only he could see. I recognized the look in his eyes, the calculation that had kept me in that marriage longer than the vows had any right to demand. It was the look of a man who checked what he could get away with and then did exactly that. The Stitcher did not move toward him. He moved toward me. He knelt with a care that did not belong to stories of monsters and warlords. He lifted the counter just enough to slide his arm under me without scraping my skin against the broken wood, then he set the counter down and carried me out into the open like a server carrying a dish that mattered. He asked me if I could speak. The paralysis had retreated a finger width. I could swallow. I could not form a word. I blinked once for yes and twice for no. I blinked twice. He nodded as if I had delivered a full statement. He set me in the one chair that still had all its legs and placed Lefty in my palm. The tiny weight curled warm against my skin, and that warmth spread like a thread of heat up my wrist, my elbow, my shoulder. The feeling of my body returned in stitches, like a limb waking from sleep. The man in the suit opened a ledger that had not been in his hands a moment before. He wrote a line. He tore the page with a neat rip that had no sound. He held the slip toward the Stitcher. It was a permit, though I could not see what it said. The Stitcher did not take it. He waited. The man in the suit turned to me and asked with the same steady tone he had used at the start, "Madam Proprietor, do you wish to press a claim?" I could breathe. I could move my tongue. I managed to say, quietly, "Yes." "Very well," he said. He clicked something I could not see. The ceiling lights steadied. The air warmed. The broken tables did not unbreak, but the space around them felt ordered again, like the mess had been put on a list. A seal none of the players had ever seen appeared above the stall, as crisp as if it had been stamped there by a heavy hand. It looked like an emblem of an open door with steam curling from within. The rope-marked man bowed his head. The waterlogged woman closed her eyes. The girls in lace smiled without teeth. The Stitcher turned back to Vincent and the squad, and when he spoke again his voice was still quiet, but the threads near his throat drew tight as new. He said, "The house accepts the claim." He said, "Return what is owed." He said, "Repair what you broke." He said, "Apologize to the cook." He said, "Leave." A young man at the back lifted a sword and tried to speak bravely. He said they had done nothing wrong. He said the cook was only an NPC with a perk. He said if the house was so sacred then why had no NPC appeared to guard it until now? The rope-marked man looked at him the way a scaffold looks at a carpenter. The young man swallowed and lowered the sword until its tip touched the floor. Another player tried to step sideways toward the door. The little girl appeared in front of him without seeming to move at all. She smiled like a child who had found a coin, not a path to violence. He stepped back. Vincent did not step anywhere. He did what he had always done when cornered. He pretended to comply and then hunted for the edge where the rule thinned. He asked what return what is owed meant. He asked what repair meant. He asked if payment in coin was acceptable. He asked the price for a stomped hot dog. The man in the suit answered that the price was the cost of ingredients and labor and time and pride. He said that the last item was not easily priced. He said that an apology could cover the difference. Vincent smiled his courtroom smile, the one that never reached his eyes, and said he was deeply sorry if I had been inconvenienced by the misunderstanding. He said he would happily pay the full cost of the food plus a generous tip. Lefty tightened around my fingers like a ring. The Stitcher looked at me again, and this time I could nod. I said, out loud, that the apology was not accepted. I said the stand was not a misunderstanding. I said the food had a name on it. I said he had destroyed something that did not belong to him and struck someone he had no right to touch. I said he would repair the stall with his own hands. I said he would sweep the splinters and scrub the stains and rebuild the warmer and replace the grill and polish the counter and carry the water and stack the chairs. I said when it was done he would say thank you for the chance to work. I said when he left he would leave his bat behind. The squad shifted again. Some looked at him. Some looked at me. One woman with a scar like a lightning branch across her cheek stared at me for a long time, and something in her posture eased as if she had just remembered that the world contained decisions other than a fight or flee. Vincent said we could not make him do that. The man in the suit said the Covenant could. The Stitcher did not repeat himself. The work began like a fog, not all at once but steadily. The rope-marked man lifted the shattered counter like it weighed no more than a plank of pine. The waterlogged woman poured a slow stream into a bucket without bending or tilting, and when the bucket filled she set it at Vincent's feet. The little girls fetched nails and wood and screws from nowhere at all, their pockets full of things no one had seen them take. The scarred woman picked up a broom. She handed it to Vincent. She held his gaze until he took it. He swept. It was graceless. It was loud. The broom snagged on broken edges and knocked crumbs of char across the floor. He cursed once under his breath and then remembered that the room had ears and eyes and hands and changed the curse into a cough. He swept again. He filled the bucket with gray swill and carried it outside and dumped it carefully and came back without comment. The bat lay where the little girl had set it, far from his reach but not far from his sight. That was the point. While they worked I cooked because I could. The paralysis in my legs faded into a soft ache, the ache sharpened into a rhythm, and the rhythm became movement. I pulled out a spare hot plate I kept beneath the counter for late nights and emergencies. I set 2 pans over the heat. I toasted buns to a glossy brown and turned the sausages with a fork until they blistered and sang. I made a tray for the stitcher first because his order had been the one on the floor and because Lefty drummed a gentle beat on my hand as if to say I am hungry. I layered bacon and cheese and jalapenos and then spooned a careful line of chili along the top so it would not spill. I handed the plate to the stitcher and he inclined his head. He did not eat immediately. He waited until I had served the girls and the rope-marked man and the waterlogged woman and the scarred player who had wordlessly joined the work, and only then did he take a single neat bite and close his eyes for a second as if the heat and the salt and the smoke had proven something he had wanted to believe. The stall began to look like itself again. Not perfect, not new, but itself. The broken warmer could not be repaired in an hour, so the rope-marked man set his hands on its frame and held it over the heat until the sausages inside were ready, the iron singing against his palms without burning him. The waterlogged woman wiped the counter with a cloth that never seemed to dry, yet never left a streak. The girls balanced on stools and rehung the little chalkboard where I wrote daily specials even though I had never written one yet. The scarred player sanded a splinter from the edge of the bench she had smashed a few minutes earlier and raised her eyebrows at me as if to ask whether an apology could be shaped like wood dust. I nodded back. Vincent worked. The more he worked the more he seethed, but work has a way of cutting the spine out of pretense. He swept again. He carried boards. He held the legs of a table while the rope-marked man bent them back into the angle that made them stand. He made no sound. He did not look at me. He looked only at the door. The man in the suit looked at him twice, then at the door once, then at me. He did not smile, but the corner of his mouth shifted barely upward as if to admit that this outcome was within acceptable variance. When the last smear of grease had been wiped from the floor and the last nail had been set, the stitcher asked if the house accepted the repair. He asked if the apology had been made. He asked if the debt was closed. I said the stall was whole. I said the debt for the hot dog was closed. I said the apology had not been given. Vincent kept his eyes on the threshold as if the simple geometry of a rectangle could carry him through anything. He muttered that he was sorry he had lost his temper. He said he was sorry if the food meant something to me. I said that food always means something to someone, it is the first language that does not use words. I said that if he returned here he would speak that language or he would not speak at all. He did not answer. He stood very still, and in that stillness I felt a shape I had not felt in a long time, the old shape of his rage when it has been outvoted and must pretend to be patience. The man in the suit closed his ledger. He said the window of lifted restrictions would shut in 3 breaths. He said the house had been made whole. He said the guests could dine. He said the players could leave. He said that anyone who attempted additional harm within the next day would trigger an audit that would make what we had all just experienced look like a stern look from a librarian. The door opened of its own accord and cool outside air folded into the room and left again. The squad gathered themselves and stepped backward into the hall in a shuffle that was almost respectful. The scarred woman paused and glanced back at me. She said thank you for the food in a voice that could have belonged to a sister or a stranger. I told her to come back as a guest next time. She nodded and was gone. Vincent lingered one heartbeat longer than the others as if trying to gather the air around him into a cloak he could wear as power. Then he stepped out. He did not look at the bat. He did not look at me. He looked at the man in the suit and said that covenants end, events change rules, and there was always a night when the house lights went out. The man in the suit said that he was familiar with scheduled events. He said that none of those events would help a man who mistook an open door for a blank check. Vincent smiled without teeth and left. Silence fell in a way it never had in that place before, a simple clean quiet that smelled like bread more than blood. The little girls climbed onto the bench that had once been a pile of splinters and swung their legs like school children. The rope-marked man set the warmer back down on its shelf. The waterlogged woman wrung out her cloth and watched the water vanish before it hit the floor. The stitcher set his empty plate on the counter and folded his hands. Lefty tapped twice on my wrist as if to say well done. The man in the suit looked at me with something like approval, which in his vocabulary might have been a parade. I asked if the covenant had always been there. He said it had. He said I had claimed it the moment I had served the first guest who paid an honest coin while standing under the moon. He said most cooks in most games never discovered the rules that were written for them because they were too busy trying to be warriors in worlds that had already built them a different kind of sword. He said the stall had a history I had not yet asked about. He said the previous proprietor had not sold hot dogs, but something like them, and that the echo of that work had made my work easier. He said if I kept serving I would learn names for what I felt when the heat in the pan matched the heat in the chest. He said if I kept serving the house would serve me back. The monsters ate. I cooked. It felt like working a line during a storm shift, every order a small promise that I could keep. I made variations without thinking and with great thought at once. A double smoked dog with charred scallion relish for the rope-marked man. A sea salt and lemon zest dog with a crisped cap of cheese for the waterlogged woman. A scarlet slaw dog for the girls, red cabbage and pepper and a hint of sugar that made their eyes go bright like they had discovered a joke. A Lefty special that was mostly bacon because Lefty thumped the counter until the stitcher nodded assent. I wrote the names on the chalkboard without meaning to. I guessed at prices I would never charge the girls. I put a jar on the counter for tips anyway because some monsters have pride in paying and I will never take that from them. Between orders the stitcher asked if he could station someone by the door in case certain players misunderstood the parting words. I told him I would never turn away company if the company arrived hungry and left with thanks. He inclined his head and said that was not exactly the same as a yes to security but close enough for the night. The rope-marked man stood outside and became a statue when he wished and a shadow when he did not. The girls ran errands I did not assign and performed tasks I had not known I needed. The waterlogged woman went to find more water simply because she could. Word spread faster than grease in a hot pan. By midnight there was a line that curved out of the hall and into the path, a line with order and volume and its own sense of humor. Monsters from dungeons I had never visited came with coins and stories. A boss I knew only by rumor placed a careful cloth over the stool before sitting, as if he feared staining the house. A creature made of moth wings and antique keys paid in buttons and was embarrassed until I told him that buttons were coin enough for a place that stitched. A tall woman with skin like glass and a heart beating visibly beneath it ordered a plain dog and cried once at a first bite, a single quick tear she wiped away with the back of her hand as if it had been an accident. I did not remark on it. Food sees us when we do not wish to be seen and forgives us when we do. When the rush finally eased and the last plates had been washed and stacked and the last bench had been pushed back under the table, the man in the suit closed his ledger again and told me I would receive a system notice in the morning. He said the bounty on my head had been rewritten by forces beyond his pay grade. He said that for the next week any player who harmed me within sight of the stall would find themselves slowed and fog-blind and very unlucky. He said that beyond that I had earned favors and that favors can be saved like spices and spent like warmth. He said I should sleep. He said he did not understand sleep but had heard it was excellent when paired with work that had mattered. He tilted his head and stepped backward and was gone. The stitcher remained. He asked if I needed anything carried. He asked if I would accept a small payment in stitches rather than coin, the way a tailor might pay a baker with mending. I told him that payment had been made and then some. He set a neat package on the counter anyway, stitched shut with red thread, and said to use it only if I needed to make a space safe in a place that was not already mine. Lefty tapped twice as if to agree and then crawled up his sleeve and hid. The girls drifted out in a cluster like a bouquet of pale flowers people forget is alive. The rope-marked man tipped an invisible hat and faded into the post at the door. The waterlogged woman smiled like a lake in wind and left a cup of clear water on the counter for the morning. I locked the stall with the key I had not known the lock wanted and turned off the lights one by one. The quiet thickened. In the dark my body remembered what had happened and began to shake. I sat on the floor in the only spot the broom had missed and breathed until the shaking became something else. I thought about the first time Vincent had broken something I made. A plate. A plan. A person. He had always been good at convincing the world that the mess had made itself. Tonight he had swept. It was not redemption. It was not even penance. It was a beginning of a ledger written in strokes he had never believed he would be made to write. I fell asleep with my head on my arms at the counter and woke to a soft chime. The system notice arrived as promised. The bounty had been replaced by a protection writ. The house carried my name. My stall had a title I had never had the courage to give it. The Sanctuary Kitchen. The words looked both ridiculous and right. I laughed once because sometimes new names do that before they settle into the bone. By midday the first players returned, not as a squad but as pairs and single figures and people who had read different threads on a forum and believed different things about me. Some wanted to apologize because the scarred woman had told them that eating food is another way to say sorry and they wanted to try it. Some wanted to test the protection because they had never believed in rules they did not write. Some wanted to ask if I could teach them to cook because their hands shook in dungeons and they wanted to learn another way to keep those hands steady. I fed the first kind happily. I fed the second kind carefully. I told the third kind to come after last call and bring onions. The afternoon tilted toward evening. The blood-red moon lifted itself above the path like a lid. I prepped more than usual. I chopped and stacked and warmed and stirred until the voice in my head that always counted down the seconds until the next disaster went quiet. A courier made a black ribbon and dried leaves fluttered down and dropped a note on the counter. It was from the sharp suit. It said that an event had been scheduled for 2 nights hence. It said Feast of the Red Moon. It said that for that night only certain protective covenants would be reduced, not removed, but thin enough that men who lived in edges would try to crawl through. It said prepare as you would prepare for a storm. I folded the letter twice and slid it into the pocket of my apron and told myself that storms are only weather and kitchens that have always been built to outlast weather. I wrote a new special on the board just to make the chalk feel like a choice. I called it the Night Watcher, a dog with roasted garlic, dark mustard, charred pepper, and a line of fire that tasted like caution and courage. The girls cheered when they saw the name, and I pretended it was for the flavor, not for the feeling. When the rush came that night, it was heavier and happier and easier to hold because I knew what I was holding. The stitcher arrived on time and ordered 2 instead of 1 because Lefty had begun to share. The rope-marked man ate outside and nodded every time someone passed who had come to cause trouble and then changed their mind before their foot hit the threshold. The waterlogged woman brought a jar of strange seeds that popped when they touched heat and tasted like rain. I ground them and sprinkled them on a plain dog, and a new idea was born right there over the heat. The scarred player came alone and ate in silence and washed her plate and left a single coin of a mint none of us had seen. The coin was warm long after she was gone. Near closing, a whisper moved through the line in the kind of wave that means someone had brought news, and not all news is sound. A low-level player stood at the back, white-faced, clutching a cheap screen. He asked if I had a moment. He said he would pay for it like a side if I wanted him to. I told him he could have a seat. He showed me the stream. Vincent sat in a dark room in the real world with his bat across his knees like a scepter. He told his viewers that the cook thought the monsters would save her forever. He told them he knew the schedules better than the suits. He told them he would be back on feast night with a permit of his own. He told them he had learned to drag things that did not wish to be dragged. He lifted his bat like a toast and smiled that empty smile that had made so many people nod and say he seems nice. Then the stream ended. The player swallowed and said he was sorry to bring it to me. He said he had to. I gave him a night watcher and told him to eat it slowly, that the kind of fire inside it is meant to be paced. When he finished, he said he felt brave in a way that did not make him want to swing anything. He left in a different posture than he had arrived, and I counted that as a win. I cleaned the stall until it was cleaner than a stall needs to be, and then I sat with my back to the counter and stared at the door that had been broken and repaired and would be tested again. I thought of all the ways to leave. I could pack. I could find another path, another map, another world. I could convince myself that starting over is the same thing as choosing. Or I could stay and ask for help and build a plan that did not require me to be alone. I took the neat package the stitcher had left and set it on my lap. The red thread winked like a small steady eye. I did not open it. Not yet. Instead, I wrote a list. It was a cook's list and a general's list and a survivor's list. Bulk buns. Extra sausage. Enough onions to make a city cry. A replacement warmer and a backup in case the replacement failed. Coal because coal keeps heat even when the flame is panicked. A pot big enough to feed a crowd that arrives all at once. A bell loud enough to cut through any noise, any argument, any attempt to drown out a voice not raised in anger. Chalk because words on a board become promises when people can point to them together. And under all of it, I wrote a line I had not let myself write even in my own head. Ask for protection and accept it. The line of monsters at my door had already taught me the first half. The second half would be the work of a chapter I had not dared to begin. I put the list under the counter where I keep the knives I only use when I am calm. I locked the door. I walked out into the hall. The rope-marked man nodded. The waterlogged woman drifted at my shoulder like a canal. The little girls flanked me like petals. The stitcher fell into step without comment. We crossed the path beneath the blood-red moon, and the night did not feel like a threat. It felt like a kitchen after last call, warm and ready for morning. I slept a few hours and woke before the light could decide what to do. I ordered supplies, enough to make the stall look like a warehouse for a day. I sharpened the knives with small patient strokes that sounded like rain on a roof. I tested the bell until the rope-marked man laughed once and covered his ears. I opened the neat package. Inside lay a spool of thread and a small knife and a square of cloth the color of sunset. The note on top was written in straight letters like stitches marching. Tie the cloth over any doorway and speak the house's name. The space will honor the house for as long as the cloth stays warm. When it cools, remove it and keep moving. I tied the cloth above the door. I placed my palm against it. It felt like the surface of bread the second before it is perfect. I whispered the name I had written on the board that morning. Sanctuary Kitchen. The chalk seemed to lift on the board as if the words had heard themselves. The air around the doorway tightened and then relaxed as if I had buckled a belt and then loosened it to a notch that fit. By dusk the line had formed again. The first few were regulars. The ones behind them were not. I recognized the hungry, cautious stance of people who had heard there might be safety here and were trying not to hope. I fed them. I watched the doorway. I kept one eye on the path where the little girls chased each other in measured circles and one ear on the bell. I did not have to wait long. Vincent appeared at the edge of the lantern light like a stain soaking into cloth. He did not come alone. He had learned nothing except to bring more of the same. The squad behind him wore new gear bought with favors instead of earned with fights. Their boots were polished and their faces were drawn and their eyes were jumpy like people who had slept on couches in rooms with too many exits. He lifted his bat like a flag. He smiled like a man about to lead a march. The players around him looked like people about to be trampled by the same march they had believed would carry them forward. He stopped at the threshold and looked up at the square of cloth. He did not understand it and that made him dismiss it. He stepped forward. The cloth warmed under my hand as if bracing. The bell string tingled. The man in the suit did not appear, not yet. The stitcher did not move, not yet. The rope-marked man lifted his head like a hound catching a scent and then settled again, because he had decided the moment to rise had not arrived. Vincent said he was here to make a purchase. He said he would take one of everything. He said he would pay. He said he wanted to show the world what happened when a cook served in a game. He said the world would watch Feast Night and learn that monsters cannot save a woman who does not want to be saved. He said a lot of things that sounded like a plan and smelled like fear. I wiped my hands on a towel. I set a bun on the grill. I turned a sausage with a fork. I said I would be happy to serve a guest. I said house rules were posted on the board. I said harm the cook and the kitchen closes. I said harm a guest and the house opens its book. I said payment in coin, not in threat. I said eat here or leave here, but do not try to own the space between. He laughed again, because laughter had always made his lies feel like jokes instead of knives. He lifted the bat as if to rest it on his shoulder the way a man might in a backyard on a gentle afternoon, and then, because he could not resist the old habit of proving a point, he flicked the tip at the chalkboard. The wood did not touch the board. The bell rang once as if a hand had slapped it. The air tightened. The cloth heated like a brand. The doorway deepened until it looked like a mouth. Behind me the stitcher drew a breath with care. The little girls stopped moving. Lefty tapped 3 times on my wrist, quick and bright, as if to say now. Feast of the Red Moon was still a night away, but storms do not always wait for schedules. The house had chosen its side. I lifted the dog from the grill, set it on a plate, and slid it across the counter. I said, eat or go. He took the plate. He held it just long enough to show me that his hands did not shake. Then he set it down without tasting it and smiled with that old thin satisfaction that was really a dare. See you tomorrow night, he said. I nodded once. The bell string rested against my wrist like a pulse. The cloth above the door held its heat. The line behind him did not break. It did not move. It watched him go the way a tide watches a man who believes water has opinions about men. When the door closed behind the last of them, the room let out a breath I had not realized we had all been holding. The stitcher looked at me with a question that did not need words. I answered it with a list that was also a promise. We will be ready. The day of the Feast of the Red Moon arrived with a heaviness in the air, as if the entire world had been simmering for hours and now sat waiting for the lid to be lifted. The path outside my stall was quieter than usual at dawn, and even the little girls in their antique wedding dresses stayed close, whispering rather than laughing. The rope-marked man sat cross-legged by the door as if carved from stone, his shadow stretching farther than the light could explain. The waterlogged woman polished the counter with her eternal cloth until the surface gleamed like glass. Lefty tapped on the boards with a rhythm I had come to recognize as both anxious and eager, and the stitcher said nothing, only adjusted his tie and straightened his spine as if this were any other day of work. It was not. I stocked supplies as if preparing for a siege. Buns stacked high, sausages wrapped and layered, onions diced in barrels that made the entire stall smell sharp enough to draw tears even before the blade touched flame. I had chili simmering in a cauldron the size of a wash basin, bacon crisped and held in covered trays, cheese grated into mountains, sauces in jars lined up like soldiers waiting for orders. The chalkboard bore the specials of the night, each one written in steady strokes, each one named not just for flavor but for meaning. The Night Watcher. The Iron Stitch. The River Dog. The Bride's Revenge. I wrote them without trembling. When I finished, I placed the chalk down and realized I had not once erased a word or corrected a line. My hand had been steady all the way through. By noon, the first monsters arrived early, drawn not by hunger but by a sense that tonight was not safe to spend alone. They clustered in twos and threes, some speaking in voices like stone breaking, others speaking not at all, their silence carrying more than words could. They paid with coins, with trinkets, with favors, but more than anything, they paid with presence, choosing to stand here rather than anywhere else. The stall became a fortress not of stone or steel but of people and monsters and memories stitched together. The man in the sharp suit appeared just before dusk, ledger already in hand. He scanned the space, adjusted the cuff of his sleeve, and announced that the feast window was open. He said certain protections would thin as predicted. He said that what had been law yesterday would bend tonight. He said that enforcement would fall not on the system but on the house. He closed his book and looked directly at me. He said the house would listen to my voice before any other. Then he stepped into the shadows, as though he had never been there at all. The blood-red moon rose larger than ever before, its light pouring down like molten copper. The stall glowed beneath it, lanterns flickering and smoke from the grill twisting into strange shapes. The first surge of customers came with a moonrise. The usual monsters, the familiar faces. They ordered their favorites and ate quickly, glancing often at the door, as if to make sure they would not miss the moment when trouble arrived. The little girls took plates and ferried them to corners, the rope-marked man stacked empty trays with mechanical precision, the waterlogged woman refilled cups with endless water. For a brief time, it felt like any other night, busier maybe, but manageable. Then the bell string vibrated against my wrist. Vincent arrived. He did not sneak. He did not skulk. He came down the path like a man walking into his own backyard, his bat across his shoulder, his smile fixed. Behind him stretched not one squad but three, players armed and armored with equipment beyond their level, bought with favors or stolen from raids where someone else had done the dying. Their faces were masked, their movements practiced, but their eyes darted nervously. They were not here for hot dogs. They were here for me. He stopped at the threshold, tilted his head at the cloth still tied above the door, and sneered. He said last night was only rehearsal. He said tonight the system would not save me. He said tonight the house lights would go out and no covenant would matter. He raised his bat and tapped it lightly against the frame. The cloth warmed under my palm, the bell gave a warning chime, and the stall held its breath. I wiped my hands on my apron, picked up a fresh bun, and set it on the grill. I said the house was open for guests. I said guests were fed. I said those who were not guests were not welcome. My voice carried farther than it should have, rolling into the hallway, into the night, into every corner where fear might be waiting. The line of monsters behind Vincent shifted, not forward but sideways, as if making space for something unseen. The little girls stepped forward as one, their wide eyes unblinking, their lace torn and glowing faintly in the moonlight. The rope-marked man rose to his full height, taller than the doorway, his head brushing the beam. The stitcher adjusted his tie and placed Lefty on the counter, and Lefty drummed once, twice, 3 times. The feast of the red moon had begun. Vincent laughed, the same empty sound he had used to charm judges and neighbors and strangers who thought they knew him. He raised his bat and signaled. His squads fanned out, weapons ready, eyes darting. One muttered about the penalty detectors being silent. Another muttered about the system flagging nothing. Vincent told them to shut up and focus. He pointed the bat at me and told them to drag me out. He promised them shares of a bounty, fame on the forums, rewards that only existed in his head. They moved because fear of him still outweighed fear of what they could not see. The first one to cross the threshold never made it 2 steps. The cloth above the door flared like a coal struck by wind. The bell screamed once. The player froze, eyes wide, as shadow stitched itself across his limbs. He collapsed, bound by threads only the stitcher could see. Another tried to leap past him. The rope-marked man moved once, his hand closing around the player's throat with the inevitability of a noose. The body dangled, twitched, and fell silent. The others hesitated, and in hesitation there is always space for choice. Some turned to run. Vincent barked orders, his voice sharp enough to cut them back into line. He told them the monsters would not kill them. He told them it was a bluff. He told them the cook was just a woman with a stove. He told them he had rights here. He told them so many things that had once been true because people had believed them. Tonight, no one believed. The little girls advanced, moving not as children but as a chorus, their voices rising in an old chant about brides and rivers and ropes. They circled the players, and with each verse the players' weapons grew heavier, their steps slower, until they could barely raise their arms. The waterlogged woman sent a wave across the floor, sweeping legs out from under them, drowning shouts in a sudden flood that vanished as quickly as it appeared. The Stitcher did not move until Vincent himself stepped inside, bat raised high. Then the Stitcher was simply there, stitches straining, eyes dark and calm, blocking the way to the counter. Vincent swung. The bat cracked against the Stitcher's shoulder with a sound like wood on stone. The Stitcher did not flinch. He reached out, caught the bat mid-swing, and held it in one hand. Vincent pulled, twisted, cursed, but the bat did not move. Lefty crawled up the bat, wrapped around it like a snake, and squeezed until the wood splintered. The pieces fell to the floor. For the first time, Vincent's smile broke. I stepped forward then, wiping my hands once more on my apron. My legs shook, but I did not stop. I told Vincent the house had judged. I told him the stall was mine. I told him he had broken what he could never build, and now the bill was due. The Stitcher released the bat's remains and stepped back. The monsters did not move. The players did not breathe. The house waited for me. I picked up a hot dog from the grill, one I had been making while the fight raged. Bun toasted golden, sausage blistered, bacon crisp, onion sweet, chili steaming. I held it out. I said, "One last meal. Guest or intruder, you choose. Eat and leave in peace, or refuse and stay as dead." His hands shook. His eyes darted. For a moment, I thought he might take it. For a moment, I thought he might finally understand that some debts can only be paid in humility. But Vincent slapped the plate from my hand, sending the hot dog skidding across the floor. He spat that he would never bow to me, never eat my food, never let me stand above him. The bell rang. The cloth flared. The stall itself seemed to sigh, as if the house had hoped for better but expected this. The Stitcher moved, and so did the rope-marked man, and so did the little girls, and so did every monster who had ever eaten here. Vincent was lifted, carried, swallowed by a tide of hands and stitches and lace and water. He screamed once, not words, just rage and fear. Then the sound was gone, cut off as neatly as a thread. When the stall quieted, there was no body, no bat, no trace. Only the echo of a man who had believed he could own what was never his. The squad scattered. Some fled into the night. Some dropped their weapons and sank to their knees, begging to be spared. The Stitcher ignored them. The house had already made its judgment. They were not guests, but they were not Vincent. They were nothing. The rope-marked man drove them out one by one, until the stall held only those who belonged. The bell fell silent. The cloth cooled. The feast of the red moon ended. I stood behind the counter, hands trembling now that the danger had passed. The Stitcher inclined his head. The little girls clapped, their laughter bright and eerie. The waterlogged woman refilled my glass and set it in front of me without a word. Lefty tapped once, soft and gentle, like a pat of reassurance. The house was whole again. From that night forward, the sanctuary kitchen was more than a stall. It became a place written into the rules of the game, a safe zone, a covenant bound by food and faith. Monsters came not only to eat but to meet, to plan, to rest. Players came too, cautiously at first, then openly, some bringing gifts, some bringing apologies, some just bringing hunger. The chalkboard filled with specials and stories. The line never stopped. I never saw Vincent again. Whether the house erased him or simply sent him somewhere he could no longer reach me, I did not know. I did not care. What mattered was that the stall stood, the house stood, and I stood. The woman who had once only known how to survive on scraps now fed an entire world, one hot dog at a time. The blood-red moon faded into pale dawn. I unlocked the stall, lit the grill, and set out the buns. The day smelled like smoke and bread and second chances. I wrote the first special of the new era on the board. The Survivor's Dog. Extra chili, extra heat, a reminder that even in the darkest game, flavor could still mean freedom. The door opened. The bell chimed. The first guest of the day stepped inside. And the sanctuary kitchen was open for business.